Kia ora, everyone. My name is Daniel. I'm one of the chief adjudicators of Uhuru Worlds, and I'm here to give you a judge briefing. It'll be useful both if you've never done much judging before or if you're quite experienced. We'll go through both the basics and some of the more advanced techniques to help you develop as judges. And by the end, hopefully, of this quite quick presentation, you'll be feeling fully competent and capable of judging at Uhuru Worlds. So I will quickly share my screen so you can see the judge briefing. Outstanding. So the first thing to know about judging is essentially what you're doing is assessing each of the four teams' contributions. The ranking then is a weighing of those different contributions depending on how much you think a particular team has convinced you to move towards believing their side of the motion. So that is the essential metric that we use to decide whether a team has won or lost or has done very well or has done poorly within the debate. Your contribution can be both rebuttal or constructive, so make sure you're being fully open to contributions no matter what formalistic structure or style they are given in. And how you weigh a contribution will have two aspects. So firstly, you look at how important the claimed conclusion is, and teams will do this explicit to you to explain to you how important they think what they're saying is. And say, for example, if they prove that there will be immense suffering, that's likely something that you will believe is going to be quite important. And the second aspect of the contribution is how much they have proven that conclusion. So have they shown that they've proven to you that the thing that they've claimed is going to happen does actually happen? And sometimes this contribution will be marginal. They won't be able to fully convince you of the thing they set out to do so, but that doesn't mean it's not a useful contribution to the debate. So if you were not convinced that they were able to claim their whole harm, but they were able to prove there was a lesser harm or harm would apply to a particular group, that's still something that is meaningful within this debate. You just weigh it less than the overall claim that they wanted to claim within the debate. So what we are looking when we're seeing whether something has been proven is we look for the logical links between arguments, seeing that everything makes sense, seeing that A connects cleanly to B, looking at the plausibility of their characterization. Do you think the average reasonable person is going to believe the types of claims that are made that are the baseline of those arguments? And when teams sufficiently explain why something is important to you, obviously some things will be intuitively very important, but some other things will require more work done. And teams that explicitly do that weighing for you will likely reflect well on them when it comes to the rankings. So all of this material is most effective when done in a comparative sense. So teams are comparing two different worlds. Version 1 of what the affirming world has to stand for, version 2 what the negating world is going to look like. And teams should engage with each other's arguments where relevant, and failing to engage, say, for example, when a closing team refuses to accept a POI from their opening, will likely weaken that team's contributions. Won't be fatal to them within the debate, but it means that they have missed an opportunity to contribute in a way that is full and meaningful. So one of the metrics that I've already brought up is this idea of the average reasonable voter. And that's essentially the construction that we use to attempt to lift ourselves as judges out of this incredibly subjective level of understanding that naturally as human beings we inhabit towards something that can be standardized and will be useful to allowing teams to know what types of arguments they should run so that they become better at debating in a productive and clear way. And so the mindset that we use is asking yourself, is this something the average reasonable voter is going to be find persuasive towards contributing, towards pulling them towards one side or other side of the motion, which is obviously the basis of a contribution. And there are four key things that you need to know about the average reasonable voter, three which are quite standard, and the fourth is one that I think everyone just needs to be reminded of. The first is that they're willing to be persuaded. So they're not prejudiced, they're not coming in with any particular mindset. They believe that the motion is something that can be debated, and all of the motions within this tournament we think can be debated. And so they have an open mindset and they're willing to be persuaded by different arguments if those arguments are put to them in a clean, cohesive way, and if those arguments aren't sufficiently undermined by the other team. They have incredibly strong logic and reasoning skills, which is the second aspect. So the average reasonable voter is potentially not someone who could go to the top room of this tournament and suddenly understand all of the arguments incredibly clearly. But luckily, you have much stronger logic and reasoning skills than the average reasonable voter. And so you use those logic and reasoning skills to their fullest extent. And finally, they're not limited to a particular context. They are a global citizen. They're knowledgeable of things all around the world if people from those particular contexts would be aware of the particular arguments that are being brought, such that it can be claimed that a well-informed global citizen who reads the newspapers roughly from around the world and is familiar with their headlines and some of the bylines and stuff that is used will likely believe that this is a claim that can be made within the debate. The final important aspect is they have a very good memory. And this is something that I think a lot of judge briefings potentially overlook. It is important to note that teams cannot fall out of the debate simply because other teams choose not to engage with them. The average reasonable voter in this context is able to remember what the opening teams say, such that it's not completely crowded out merely by the immediacy of what the closing teams run. So you need to ensure there is that engagement. You're not just rewarding the last thing that is said within the debate. So extensions. An extension, I think, is actually incredibly simple. We put a lot of time and effort in explaining to what it is, but realistically, it's any contribution that doesn't fall afoul of two rules. And that first rule is that it can't be contradictory, which is otherwise described as knifing. And then secondly, it can't be derivative. And this is not actually even a rule, because a contribution is something that is new. It moves you farther than what has already been contributed to the debate. So contradictory, we mean any argument that cannot be true at the same time as an earlier claim. And this can be both within teams. So say, for example, a later team wants to, the second speaker wants to reverse on an earlier position in a way that helps their team, or it can be across teams. Your opening says something that the later team disagrees with, and they decide to say something that cannot be true at the same time as the arguments that have been run by their opening. You are not penalized for knifing in any way. It does not hurt you as a team, but merely you cannot benefit from any of the impacts that flow from the latter claim being true. It's as if you didn't make that claim, as if there was a blank space in your speech that harms your ability to then claim any material that flows off from that material. Be careful you are not penalizing teams for knifing. It is wrong to say you lost this debate because you knifed. It is more accurate to say because you knifed, the material that you then built from this material could not be credited to you. This is the stuff you did have within this debate, but weighing it against the other teams, it is not a sufficient contribution to rank you high. So it just means you can't benefit from that material. It doesn't mean you are penalized in a way that can hurt you if you have other good material within the debate. Second rule is being not derivative. And essentially being derivative is when you don't extend on an earlier argument, you just repeat it with different words. And this is different to being marginal. Sometimes claims are like slight adjustments that do to some degree increase your willingness to believe a claim from opening. That's not inherently derivative because it is like an addition to that argument. A lot of the time it's just not a particularly strong or convincing. It might move you a little bit, but relative to the way that you were moved by the original argument, it is going to be quite marginal. Derivative is essentially any material that repeats the earlier arguments that came before and doesn't add to them in a way that helps contribute to your understanding of the debate. So reminder, contributions can be marginal. If you add new analysis or new impacts to existing arguments, that does have a lot of value as long as you assess how important the additional material is to proving or weighing the argument, just like you would if it was claims from the second speaker of a team. So once you have figured out the broad baseline rules of judging, then we have some feedback processes to help you both score other judges and then also to score the speakers, which is obviously very important to their break chances or their position on the tab. So firstly, scoring your judge. This is also, of course, useful for any of the teams who may be watching this to get an inside view of how judges will be judging this tournament. So when you are scoring your judge, you're looking for accuracy and you're looking for the justification. And these are the two elements that I think are important. Someone can be accurate as you agree with them. You think they have said things that were clear within the debate and happened within the debate. They weren't making things up. And their justification is how they're able then to use that accurate view of the debate in a way that is able to convince you of the way that they have done the rankings. They've walked you through, this is how this team made an argument, proved an argument, here's how they told me it was important, it beats this argument for these reasons. It is not just about whether you agree with their decision. You are asking yourself whether it is a reasonable decision and whether it is a thorough, well-explained decision. So if you give a 1 to a 3, you would not trust this person with a vote going forward. They did not weigh the material. They missed significant sections of the debate in a way that made their adjudication incoherent. I apologize if you have to give anyone a 1 to a 3 at this tournament. Sometimes judges are simply not up to the task in a particular debate, so don't be afraid of giving out those scores because it's good information for us, but be sure this is not someone who you'd want judging or voting as a panelist in any debate going forward unless they show significant signs of improvement. With a score of 4 to a 6, you are recommending this person to panel, which means that you want them to have a vote, but you're not necessarily comfortable with them being the only person having a vote because they can get some things wrong, and you wouldn't really be comfortable with them fully explaining to teams in tight calls why one team had won and one team hadn't in the way that a chair might be able to do. So that means they have described and weighed all the relevant arguments appropriately, but there were problems with the clarity of the oral adjudication. With number 7, you recommend them to chair, they judge well, they give a clear adjudication, and when you're giving an 8+, you recommend them to break. High quality adjudication that importantly makes a sophisticated understanding of the debate, so they've got high accuracy, great justification, accessible to all those involved. Because we are unfortunately simply not interested in judges who may be much smarter than and much more experienced than all of the other teams within the debate, but simply use that as an opportunity to demonstrate their significant understanding of the way that debating operates or could be improved without explaining what actually happened within the debate in a way that makes sense within the context of that particular room. Scoring your speakers. Benchmark is a 75. That should be the average score probably given out at this tournament, and it is a very large tournament, so you'll also have variation, significant variation on either side of that 75 mark. With a 50 to 60, this means that they did not speak or gave a speech of extremely little relevance. I don't think I've ever given out a score between 50 to 60 beyond people who literally weren't present in the debate or didn't give a speech. It is, of course, possible for people who are incredibly new to the style, but if anyone is putting together arguments that are vaguely related to the topic and do even anything to improve your understanding, it is unlikely you'll be giving them a 50 to a 60. 60 to 70 is relatively common, and that's where people have attempted to engage with the argument but have really missed the mark. They make mostly irrelevant contributions. There are flaws within those arguments that mean that there are major deficiencies in your ability to credit them. So that's they've really attempted to make arguments, but very few of those arguments have moved you any degree towards understanding or believing their side of the motion. 70 to 75 is where we're getting into better speeches. So this is essentially roughly like maybe a quarter of the speeches of this tournament will hopefully fall between 70 to 75 if people are following the mathematics quite clearly. And this is mostly relevant contributions that do have some serious deficiencies, but are still mostly relevant and do help you to some degree believe their side of the motion, even if there were problems within those arguments that maybe decrease their ability to prove the claims that they wanted to make. When you get up to a 78, 75 to 78, those are good speeches, above the average quality for this tournament. 79, so from a 79 to 82 is likely a high-level speaker at a major. And these are scores that is someone getting an 82. If they get 82s consistently throughout the tournament, they could potentially be best speakers of WUDIC or of ABP. So if someone is consistently turning out high-level scores, they're likely one of the top-level speakers at this major. If you're giving an 83 or a plus, it is likely one of the best speeches of the tournament. It'll be given out relatively infrequently, so please do not be enormously trigger happy with your 83s and above, but it is a truly breathtaking speech that has done an incredible amount to convince you. And in like a top room in round 6, for example, you would potentially maybe be seeing 83s and above, but once again, I would stress that they are quite rare and they need to do something quite extraordinary to be able to get those types of scores. Types of motions. We will roughly be using 3 types of motions at this tournament, and most of you will be familiar with the motions. There may be some slight variation in form and style, but essentially part of the job of the debater is really to take the motion as it is stated and do your best job to explain it and interpret it in a way that makes sense to the adjudicator. So just memorizing the slide is not sufficient to overcome your job within the debate, which is really to try and understand this material and understand the motion and make all of your arguments specific and particular to the exact motion that is put before you. Policy motions. And this is, this house supports X, that we should do X. Governments must approve a course of action and can provide a model that specifies how they will do that thing. So they will explain, this is what our burden within the debate is, we have to stand by this thing, this is exactly the type of way that we are going to do it. There are some rules as to how you can set up the model that the judge is supposed to regulate. So if they do something unreasonable with the model that falls afoul of the rules that I'll explain here, that is something that can be challenged within the debate or discounted by a judge if it is particularly an unreasonable way to see the debate. So the model can exclude anomalous examples. And so those are basically like the debate-breaking examples that don't really apply to the rest of the debate. Say, for example, if there's debate, this house would ban plastic surgery. It could have a specific exemption, say, for like burn victims or something that falls out of the broad ambit of the type of people that will most likely be hit by the model. But it can't be overly restrictive. So you couldn't say, for example, in a debate about banning plastic surgery, say that this debate is only limited to plastic surgery for children and adults should be able to get it. So that is an overly restrictive interpretation that isn't about anomalous examples, but actually gets to the heart of what we think the burden needs to be within this debate. And you need to use your good sense and sense of reasonableness to interpret these motions. The opposition may, but are not in any means required to, they could just stand for the status quo, propose a mutually exclusive counter model, which must be comparable in scope to the government model. So you can't devote 4% of the global GDP towards solving X problems with this enormously expensive solution. You have to look at the ambits of solutions that are equally on the table, explain why one solution is equivalent to the other solution, and then explain why your solution is one that is better. And that'll either happen through the lens of saying, this is how much money it's likely to cost, this is how politically unpopular each policy is going to be. So you will actually get a bit of discussion about what are the likely alternatives of a particular policy that is suggested. But sometimes, of course, opposition will be bound by a particular comparative in the motion, and that's normally when a motion is like, that we prefer we do X thing rather than doing X thing. So it'll explain what are the two worlds the teams need to stand behind. Actors' motions are essentially a policy motion viewed through the self-defined interests of an actor. This house, as Vladimir Putin, would do X, Y, and Z. And the way I like to think about actors' motions is how would you convince this person or this actor to support this motion? If you had a very open-minded and willing to listen and high-level reasoning skills, Vladimir Putin sitting in front of you, who really wants to hear your thoughts on whether he should engage in X policy with his life, try and think out what are the arguments that would be persuasive to this person, because it's all through the self-defined interests of that particular actor, rather than what you think is good for the world overall. So be very careful. Is this an actor motion or is it a general policy motion? Do I need to be making arguments to the global informed citizens, or do I need to be making arguments that are targeted towards the interests or how this person sees their obligations? And then finally, we have retrospective motions, and that's essentially just where teams do not have the fiat to dictate how the issue is approached. Rather, they must explain what happened and what would have happened had the regretted event not happened. So say we regret American independence. We can't say what we would have preferred to happen would be Britain ruling for forever and ever and ever, and no evolution of the American political system or political life at all, because an opposing team could stand up and be like, you can't just propose that vision of the world. You have to explain to me why that is the likely alternative. Then you have to explain why it's a better alternative. So with regrets motions, figure out what would have happened had that other thing not happened. Explain to me why that is true, because you, unlike in a policy debate, can't specifically model exactly what you would have stood for. Otherwise, have to explain why that is a thing that is going to be likely. Before and during the debate, this is getting to more of the technical requirements for your judges. Check all of the teams are there. If a team is missing, message the judge chat, message the adjudication core. Secondly, audio check every participant by getting them to introduce themselves personally. Thirdly, take all of their names, positions, and gender pronouns if applicable, and make sure you write it down so that when you are coming to writing up the ballot and putting in all of the names, you're not suddenly like, oh goodness, which way around do those two names go? Make sure you're actually taking adequate records. Four, please check whether everyone consents to being streamed or recorded. There may be some more specific requirements here, but the convening team will get in touch with you if you are one of the rooms that is going to be recorded or streaming. And then you will likely inform the judge chat whether your full room consents and wait for them to confirm whether you are or not going to be streamed. And so, but I would stress that this is particularly run by the convening team. So the convening team will make sure that you are fully up to date on what exactly the protocol is if your room is going to be the one that is recorded. If a speaker drops out, pause the timer and attempt to get in contact. And if unsuccessful, send a message to the judge chat, and we will come up with a solution, be it a swing speaker or one of the other solutions that we could possibly get, say, for example, delaying the debate, making sure that the person is able to get back in contact with you through some of the other channels that we have. This is a tournament that's online. There will be some tech difficulties, so your flexibility and your patience are greatly appreciated from everyone who's involved in running this tournament. Deliberation. Be swift. This is an enormous tournament, and we need things to run to time. So 15 minutes only. If you have reached 14 minutes, and as the chair, you should be keeping a timer next to you, and you have not come to a consensus decision, you need to vote at 14 minutes, and then make sure that you get onto scoring teams as quickly as possible. Ask your panelists at the beginning of the deliberation, once they have finished having a little bit of a think, to send you their rankings via private message, and then include your trainees in everything but voting. They are there to have a role within those discussions, even if they're unable to have a vote. All voting must be conducted comparison by comparison. So explain why one team beat another team, beat another team, beat another team, making sure that all of those links make sense and you don't have any, oh, we just don't know how these goes. We think they beat this one, but beat this one, like push together rankings. So make sure you can justify each of the positions within the call relative to the teams on either side of them. And sometimes you will be at a rush to discuss scores, so please leave yourself enough time so that you can discuss the scores once you have come together with your rankings, and then your score should obviously reflect how close or far apart the margins between the teams were. Role of the chair is to moderate the discussion, keep it quick, keep it firing, because if everyone is just talking about what they found interesting within the debate, you could have a 45-minute adjudication deliberation rather than a 15-minute one. So sometimes the chair will unfortunately be a little bit brisk, a little bit direct in terms of making sure that the conversation happens where it needs to be. And so if you are a panelist and your chair asks you a question, try to answer the question as directly as possible. That'll be what is valuable for your chair in terms of helping the decision come together. This is a very collaborative process. If you're not convinced by another judge ranking, please feel free, if you are convinced, feel free to change your rankings, but if you're not convinced, please do not change your rankings. Splitting is entirely okay. What we are interested in is you being able to justify and explain why you disagreed with the other judges, and it is only fair to the teams that if you are not convinced by what the other judges have said, you are still using your independent judgment, and that you split so to reflect to the teams where the disagreement may lie, because that's the honest thing to do with your position. If a judge, be it the chair, be it the trainee, be it the panelists, well, maybe not the trainee because they're not allowed to vote anyway, you are simply not allowed to vote. You can take part in discussion to the degree that you are able to hear things, but when it comes to the final decision, that needs to be made with the votes only of those who have heard the entire debate. And that is the end of the judges briefing. I hope that you enjoyed it. We are very much looking forward to having you at this tournament. And if you have any questions, please get in touch with any of the members of the Adjudication Corps. Thank you.